So we're in Tbilisi at ADB's 57th annual meeting, and I have with me Professor Glenn Denning. He's Professor of Practice at the University of Columbia. He's been fighting for food security in a career spanning 30 years. Let's have a conversation with him primarily around what is food security? What can governments do better? What can organizations like the Asian Development Bank do better in this direction? What can we do better? So let's start our conversation. But before that, a look at some statistics on food security. The 2022 statistics of FAO say Asia has 402 million starving people as compared to Africa, which has 282 million. That might surprise many of you who might think that Africa has more starving people, has more undernourished people than Asia. So those are some very striking, staggering figures. Let's start our conversation with Professor Glenn Denning. Professor, my first question to you is, what is food security?
Well, food security is really about access to food, but access to sufficient food, nutritious and safe food, so that you can live a healthy and productive life. It's as simple as that. It's not about starvation. Starvation is at the extreme end of food insecurity, but there are many conditions before we get to that level that are really going to affect our health, our well-being, our productivity, and that's where we see what's called chronic hunger. Chronic hunger is more typically representing maybe 90% of those who are hungry. But then you have acute hunger, and that's much more like the sorts of things you see on the television screens where people are literally starving to death.
So my second question to you is that there's enough being said and written about the connection between food security and climate change. Now, sometimes it's difficult to get your head around to it. What could possibly be the connection between people not suffering from malnutrition and climate change?
There's a strong connection between food security or food systems and climate change. It works in two directions. First of all, our food system and really specifically our agriculture is very much affected by climate change, because our agriculture really evolved at a different time under a different climate. And now we're seeing all kinds of changes occurring. We're seeing increased temperatures. We're seeing heat waves across Asia right now. We're seeing droughts. We're seeing increased flooding, severity of flooding, other severe events, hurricanes and the like. We're seeing sea level rise and causing salinity of our agricultural areas. So we're getting a lot of impacts, including increases in pests and diseases. These are all affecting our agricultural production and even our distribution of food. So there's that side of the equation, that the changing climate is affecting and adversely affecting our food availability. Now, the other side of it is that agriculture and our larger food system is contributing to climate change. In fact, the food system as a whole contributes about 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions that are causing these rising temperatures, right? So some of that is agriculture, of course, and we know about ruminant or beef production and milk production and so on, and rice production is another source of greenhouse gases. But there's also land clearing, removal of forests, there's also transport, there's also food waste. So when we put all of that together, the food system is a big contributor to climate change. So if we're looking for solutions to climate change and solutions to kind of bring down our greenhouse gas emissions, we have to look at changes to the food system itself.
Over a period of time, there has been realization that this area needs more finances. More and more finances are being committed. Is it enough? Do we need the private sector to bail us out as well? What are your thoughts on this?
Right. So, of course, there's not enough funding going into this. There's not enough funding. I mean, the challenge is there are two sets of challenges. One is we need to invest in public goods. global public goods, and that's where obviously the MDBs, the ADB, and others need to come together to contribute the kind of basic infrastructure that's needed for our food systems to not just continue, but to actually resurge and really contribute to a food secure world. So infrastructure, research and development, regional integration, economic integration is really important. But we have to also involve the private sector in this. Businesses are important because one of the key challenges is moving surpluses of food from where they're produced to where they can be consumed. So I've basically over many years really, for me it's come down to sort of 5 major areas of investment that are important. The first of those is what I call sustainable intensification. And many people would say, is that an oxymoron, sustainable intensification? It's not. Now, I'll explain why. Whichever way we look at it, population growth is occurring, people's diets are changing, and some agricultural areas are going out of production. So what that means is we have to actually increase our productivity on our existing agricultural land, right? But we have to do so in a sustainable manner. We have to do so in ways that essentially make much more efficient use of the inputs that we use, our water and our nutrients and our energy. At the same time, we have to work out ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from our agriculture. But we have to continue to increase productivity and even profitability, because farmers aren't going to change their practices unless these practices are profitable. So the only way they can be profitable is if we have effective businesses and effective private sector operating hand in hand with government. And that brings us to the second area that's really important, and that is market infrastructure. And this really comes down to a lot of the investments that the MDBs and the ADB are well known for. And that's that physical infrastructure, transport, energy, information communication technologies. If we have that infrastructure in place, we can enhance the business environment and improve opportunities for farmers to generate surpluses and make those surpluses available to consumers at reasonable prices, all right? Now, the third area that we often neglect is post-harvest management. So we produce more food, but often that food is lost or wasted. In fact, globally, about 1/3 of the food that is produced by farmers never reaches the consumer. It's either lost along the value chain or wasted by retailers and consumers at the end of the value chain. So finding ways to reduce, well, we know there are ways to reduce those post-harvest losses, really important. The fourth area that is important is really about shifting our diets. And that is, it sort of works in both directions. We've got a world where we have very large numbers of undernourished, malnourished people. And you mentioned 400 million people in Asia are hungry, actually more than there are in Africa. So obviously we need to fill those gaps. We need to make food available, healthy, nutritious food available to those who don't have it. On the other side of it, we have more than 2.5 billion people on the planet who are over-consuming, who are consuming too much of the wrong types of food and calories and sugars and salts and the like. So this overconsumption is leading to this epidemic of overweight and obesity, which is going to be crippling our health systems going forward. So a lot of work needs to be done there. And finally, there's social protection. The fifth pillar is social protection, because with social protection, what that says is some people are unable to achieve food security on their own. They need support from others. So public sector, in most cases, international organizations provide that level of food security that some people can't manage through their own income or their own production. So those 5 areas require investment, and frankly, we're under-investing in all of those areas. And in every one of those areas, it requires a combination of both public sector and private sector, and of course, third sector, NGOs and others, academic institutions, and frankly, actions by individuals like you and me. We can actually make a difference across, to improve food security globally by our own behavior, our own actions. I'm always saying that, a well-nourished nation is a prosperous and peaceful nation. And again, I'd like to see this on the agenda of every political leader. Now, why are they not? Well, I think there's probably not a full understanding of this connection. Chronic undernutrition isn't that obvious. I mean, a lot of these nutrient deficiencies are not the type that would lead you to, fall down and die. It's more a case of living with essentially disabilities for the rest of your life.
Okay, so let's talk something positive now. Are there any success stories, not just limited to the Asia and the Pacific, but globally? Is there anything that we all can learn from, that the governments can learn from?
I think what's really interesting now, and I'd say awareness about this has certainly increased in the last few years. In fact, on yesterday and the first day of this meeting, we were in a panel, and on our panel was Minister Mahmood Ali from Bangladesh, the Minister of Finance. So why is the Minister of Finance sitting on a panel talking about agriculture and food security? Well, a very good reason is that if we don't get that right, it's going to have serious consequences on the economy of the country. Actually, Bangladesh has realized that and has invested very wisely. And just as an example, I could use that example, that in the past 20 years or so, Bangladesh has reduced its stunting level in children under the age of 5 from more than 50% to less than 30% now. So it's basically halved the level of stunting in the country through very wise investments. So countries like Bangladesh, Nepal, Cambodia, they all represent success stories in that respect. But 20-something percent stunting is still not good. We've still got to bring it down a lot further, and that's why I say we still need to invest, a lot more than we currently are in improving food security. In Africa, I mean, a number of countries, Ethiopia, Ghana, Malawi, have all greatly turned around. I mean, surprisingly, many folks had written off Africa 20 years ago, but surprising for many, their productivity and improvements in agriculture and reductions in malnutrition have been very impressive over the last 20 years. But look, I think we have so many success stories across Asia that can, not necessarily be copied and modeled, but at least should inspire us to believe that improvements are possible. Asia was the site of the Green Revolution in the 1960s and 70s and 80s. And with all the criticisms aside, the fact is it actually saved hundreds of millions, if not billions of people from hunger and starvation. So what we've got to do now is sort of like move to the next level. There may be enough calories being produced at the moment, but we need to sort of look at, firstly, diversity of diets. We need to also look at how the food is produced and how it can be produced more sustainably. And I think we can just look across the region and see different places. Like Cambodia is another fascinating case. I mentioned that its levels of stunting have also halved in the last 20 years. But imagine production, when I first went to Cambodia in, I think it was 1986, national rice production was 2 million tons. it was was depending on food aid from the World Food Program and others to support the country. Now it's 11 million tons, and Cambodia is a modest rice exporter. I mean, these sorts of changes are possible, and we can look to examples of that around Asia and be inspired by that.
Right. So coming to people like us, people who live in the privileged part of the world where we can choose what we eat. We want to eat unhealthy, that's our choice. We want to eat healthy, that's our choice. What can we do better to make this situation better for the vulnerable? Is there anything we can do at all?
Well, individuals can act in many ways. I think they can start by looking at themselves and their own household and look at their behavior and start to model that. Like, that could be in terms of what they consume, in terms of what they waste, and kind of reducing their environmental footprint. I think that's a very good starting point. If you did nothing else, that would at least be a very modest contribution. I think the second thing is, really, we should all try to learn more about the food system, to try to learn more about agriculture. Most of us who live in urban settings, we don't necessarily see where our food is produced, how it is produced. Make the effort to learn more about that. Visit rural areas, meet farmers, talk to farmers. Maybe by doing that, you'll appreciate how the food gets to you, and maybe a little bit more hesitant when it comes to wasting food and being more careful with that incredible resource. Another thing is, well, we get to vote, right? So help, really pressuring our politicians to really take on this idea of a well-nourished nation is a prosperous and peaceful nation. I think we just keep pressuring folks to sort of take actions in the public sector along those in those ways. As consumers, of course, how we what we buy has an impact in terms of demand and what the markets will ultimately provide. And I think at the end of the day, what I encourage my students, back at Columbia is, think about working in this area. This is a great career, and it's a very interesting ecosystem, the food system. Like, you could end up you could work for a UN agency that works on this. You could work for a government. You could work for a business, a private sector organization. You could work for an NGO. You could create your own social enterprise. There's a lot of enterprise going on, really interesting entrepreneurship in the food sector at the moment. So it's inspiring a lot of young people to get involved in that. So you can, beyond what you do yourself personally, you can make a career out of this.
Professor, my last question to you is about the role of women. While women, it's well known that every conflict situation, women are the worst losers and the most affected. But they're also the most innovative. They're also the most resilient. Women's voices need to be heard on this issue as well. How can it be done?
So, well, women, we could bring them in at all levels because, first of all, a very large numbers of farmers, a very high proportion of farmers in many societies are in fact women farmers. So the starting point would be to recognize that, to understand that, and to realize that they need to be the targets of our investment. Because sometimes in those same societies, one might find the men coming to the front of the line and telling you what they want, right? And I've traveled the world and I've seen that time and time again. So being able to say, oh, wait, could we see the women over here, could we have a conversation with them, right? And in some cultures, of course, we would send women, would then go and talk to them and talk to them about their interests, but also their knowledge, and about their children, and we will get very different perspectives to what we would get from men. So really engaging them, and of course women are involved in the, in these value chains, not just in cropping, in livestock, especially in livestock. In South Asia, women are the major livestock keepers there. So, they're very much involved in that. So again, they need to be participants. They need to be part of the design of programs, and in that way, they should be ultimately beneficiaries. But I think it needs to go all the way up. I think we need more women leaders across the board. My program, which master's program in development practice that I've run at Columbia now for 15 years, 70% of my students are women. 70% are women. So. And frankly, I don't even know why. I've never really asked, but I'm very happy with that, because that's a great starting point, that we have women speaking with women and men, of course. And I think it's great too when more women become leaders. I mentioned Bangladesh earlier on, again, having women leaders in these high places at the level of a prime minister or president, ministers and so on, having them really around the table and contributing at the highest levels of decision making, I think is really important as well. So there's plenty to be done there. We're clearly not doing enough at the moment, but I see some good signs, and we just need to do more of it.
Professor, thank you so much for taking the time out to be with us today. It's really been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.